biblical stories as codes for deciphering the reality of the world today. Part 4. The codes of the story of Exodus. The story of the Exodus from Egypt did actually occur historically. However, many codes and insights are also woven in it, which can shed light on the current state of humanity. Entering slavery as a code for falling for the principle of temptation. How was it that the Israelites, who were part of the upper class of the Egyptian society in the days of Joseph, became slaves? Jewish ancient writings answer this question with the following story. Pharaoh tempted the Israelites by telling them, "Please, let us join forces. Let us take bricks and build together." The Israelites were so excited and impressed by the personal example of Pharaoh that they hurried with all their might and vigor to join him. Until, as the day ended, Pharaoh posted Egyptian taskmasters over them and told them, "Count and calculate the number of bricks that were done that day, as that would be the quota the Israelites will have to reach every day." The message behind this story is that the Israelites entered slavery out of temptation. We fall into slavery as a result of surrendering to temptation, and not necessarily because it is forced upon us. As early as the story of the Garden of Eden, we see that the plan of the snake followed the principle of temptation, and this is precisely also the strategy of the darkness in present times. The darkness does not openly coerce anything on anyone, but cunningly lures people to enter the prison of the matrix, where, seemingly, democracy and economic freedom exist. However, in reality, it is a prison for the human spirit. Entering slavery of your own free will is done through mind control, which is strongly manifested in all forms of media. He who controls people's minds is able to transform them into subjects and control them without the need to use any force. Through systematic brainwashing, thought patterns are planted and nurtured, which lead to emotional responses, which in turn bring about the desired action. Who can avoid the tentacles of the darkness which clutch and grip all form of media? Only he who is not idle in spirit and who can still think independently and freely. Nevertheless, after some time, the sweetness of temptation that has led to a state of slavery turns to bitterness. Here are some examples of such a shift from our own lives. After we were tempted to make unnecessary credit card purchases, the payment will become due and payable. After we were tempted to pursue a college degree or a career, not because of our love for it, but to pacify our parents so that they can be proud and say, "My child is a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer," the feeling of emptiness and regret will come. After being tempted to marry a spouse whom society deems successful, but is not the real soulmate, the abyssal sadness will also come. The disastrous consequences of the temptation to consume any addictive substances in order to escape the pain or to gain a momentary pleasure will surely come. Egypt was a place that not only enslaved the body, but also imprisoned the spirit. And when the spirit is in bondage, it cries for help.
And the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. Exodus 2:23.
The light is merciful and abundant in grace. From the beginning of mankind to the end of times, the light has helped and will help the human spirit. When the request for help has been and will be true and genuine.
And God heard their groaning. Exodus 2:24.
Quiet demonstrations of weed smokers or violent demonstrations with protest signs would not have helped the Israelites to gain their freedom from Pharaoh and escape Egypt, much like they will not help mankind today escape today's Pharaoh, the puppeteers of the Matrix. First, the Israelites had to understand that salvation would not come from any earthly source. Only then, when the suffering and the need are greatest, God's help is closer than ever. The help always comes through messengers who had shown and will show the right path towards salvation to those people who were and will be ready to listen and implement the instructions from the light that the messengers present. Moses was chosen to lead the Israelites as they changed their consciousness level from that of the slaves in Egypt to free people of the Promised Land. From the description of the life story of Moses as it is depicted in the Bible, it is clear that the light carefully prepared him for this role. A person's destiny is embodied and encrypted in his name. The name Moses in Hebrew means to draw out or rescue, which suggests that right from his birth, the light destined him for the role of the rescuer that draws the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses grew up in the house of the Pharaoh so that he had personal knowledge of the enemy he would have to confront later in life. After Moses left Egypt to live in Midian, he became a shepherd and spent many hours alone in the desert. It is quite possible that during such period he received additional training to prepare him to become the shepherd of God's flock and transform him from a shepherd to a seer. However, the veil was removed from Moses' eyes only when he encountered the burning bush, which is a code for the calling and preparation of a person to serve the light. It is a powerful and transformative event that takes place from within. The spark, which exists in the spirit of each called or chosen one, becomes a mighty flame which renders the person incapable of anything except to kneel and say, "Here I am." That is, I am taking my post to fulfill my calling. It is important to mention that he who is called to serve the light does not go out looking for his calling, nor chases after the fulfillment of his mission, but rather the calling or mission finds him at the right time. In other words, the human spirit is the one called for the mission, not one's ego, which pushes for it. The light will always seek and target men and women with certain qualities that will enable it to anchor in them, and through them spread its word. One such quality, humility, is highly sought after by the light, since a humble person, in essence, is an empty vessel for the light, standing ready to be filled. Whereas he who is arrogant maintains the glory all to himself and is full of himself, and thereby is unable to receive anything else. Humility also enables the spirit to become lighter and ascend upwards to higher spheres in order to draw enlightenments from them, which would often be difficult to express in words. Moses is described in the Bible as having these two qualities.
Now Moses was a very humble man, humbler than anyone else on the face of the earth. Numbers 12:3. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Exodus 4:10.
However, at the preparation stage, Moses still did not view himself as a leader. Indeed, he immediately stepped up to the call from the light by saying, "Here I am." However, in the beginning, he doubted his ability to fulfill his grand double mission, not only to confront Pharaoh, but also to lead the whole of the Israelites out of Egypt. The answer he received from God was,
"I will be with you." Exodus 3:12.
This is a promise that the called one is not supposed to rely solely on his own strength, but that he needs only to open himself up and trust in the help and strength of the light so that he can fulfill his mission. However, Moses was still doubtful. Surprisingly, he did not doubt his ability to defeat Pharaoh, but his ability to gain the trust of the Israelites.
Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Exodus 4:1.
That is because it is easier to defeat the darkness than to make people understand that they can defeat the darkness. Changing consciousness is the hardest thing for people to do, and is an issue with which all of the prophets and messengers had to deal. For this reason, ancient writings deemed that it was easier to get the Israelites out of Egypt than to get the slave mentality out of the Israelites. Similarly, today, it can certainly be said that it is harder to form a new human being than to build a new world. The light, however, also resolved Moses' additional doubt by granting him the ability to perform signs and wonders, which a regular person simply could not have done, so that the Israelites would believe him that he was not lying. This gift, in essence, is the ability to communicate with the elemental beings. These beings, who are divided into the four elements, earth, water, fire, and air, safeguard and maintain the entire creation. During the Exodus, they helped Moses both in destroying the evil and wrong, and with building the right and good. According to the plan of the light, Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites leave Egypt. This was for the purpose that both the Egyptians and the Israelites would gain conviction as to who is the Lord of the world.
"I will harden Pharaoh's heart." Exodus 7:3.
However, as previously explained in the Code of the Tower of Babel, only from the perspective of the underdeveloped consciousness level, God personally punishes. However, from the perspective of the developed consciousness level, Pharaoh automatically brought upon himself his punishment according to the laws of creation. How? During turning points throughout the history of mankind, the light has only ever increased in strength. This increase in strength is embodied by the increasing pressure. It can be equated to the process of producing olive oil, which entails crushing, pressing, and separating. Under the ever-increasing pressure, everything hidden deep within each person is exposed, and thereby each person brings the judgment on himself by himself. This is how Pharaoh's wickedness came to light, whereby he also brought his own demise upon himself. Similarly, that is also how the wickedness of the New World Order protagonists would be exposed, and they would bring ruin upon themselves by their own hands. However, during the days of the final judgment, at the time of the great judgment of all mankind, not only would the world's wicked stand under the spotlight, but also each and every person. Everything will come to light and will be exposed. The big exposure of the souls of all humans will not allow for anything to stay hidden or for the ego to hide behind any disguise. And so it happened in the exodus from Egypt that Pharaoh's inner world was exposed. He could have chosen to either align himself with the light or to be struck with plagues. Pharaoh's insistence to blindly pursue his own will, which clearly opposed the will of the light, is a code for the inherent stubbornness that lies in the human ego. We all have a choice to align ourselves joyfully with the will of the light, but most often we choose to listen to our own ego and be struck by plagues. Everyone knows what was Pharaoh's choice. His life ended by drowning because he commanded to drown the children of the Israelites. The law of cause and effect, the law of karma, never fails. The question is whether we, as humanity, would internalize the lesson and would stop choosing the torturous path of suffering, when the light always shows us a different way to master the necessary lessons on the journey to our spiritual maturity. The will of God is embodied in the laws of creation, also known as the laws of nature. Since these laws were set by the Creator, they are perfect. They work impeccably, faultlessly, and seamlessly, since perfection, by definition, requires absolute utter consistency, whereas anything that lacks strict consistency cannot be divine. Therefore, even the 10 plagues that afflicted Egypt were not unnatural phenomena, but rather they took place through the use of natural phenomena at the right moment and on a much larger scale than usual, in order to create the desired effect, which can be called a miracle. That is, a miracle is not an event that happens outside the laws of nature, but it develops extremely quickly or at the perfect timing by a person who was granted special power or through other means. For example, the meaning of the plague of blood is not that the water turned to actual blood, but rather that the water transformed to resemble the color of blood. This phenomenon of red-hued water can sometimes occur in the Nile due to red algae bloom, which contains a toxin that can be harmful and therefore renders the water undrinkable. As well, the plague of frogs is also a possibly natural phenomenon in Egypt. Each year, as the flooding water of the Nile recede, the number of frogs surges greatly. Similarly, the parting of the Red Sea took place in accordance with the laws of nature. It is a common phenomenon that during the tide, the water of the Red Sea seeps through the sand underground, and suddenly the water begins to rise and gush forth from the sand that was previously dry. During a very short period, the sand would become wet and muddy, and as the water continues to rise, a layer of water would cover the sand until finally the entire area would be covered by water. This is what happened once to Napoleon I, who was touring the area and walked through the land with no difficulty one direction. However, when he came back, he found that the same path was underwater and dangerous to cross. Similarly, the same happened to tourists at present time, who had to be rescued by boat due to high waters from the very place they walked through on foot just hours earlier. The opposite happens during low tide in the Red Sea. The water that covers the sand seeps down until it disappears, and the place that hours before was covered with water suddenly appears as dry land. Thus, All the miracles that happened during the exodus from Egypt not only did not contradict the laws of nature, which are one and the same with the laws of creation, but in fact, these laws were used by the elemental beings. Though, let's not get too far ahead. After Pharaoh and Egypt were stricken by the plagues, the Israelites were finally able to be set free from slavery and escape Egypt. However, according to ancient interpretations of the Hebrew text, only 1 in 5, 1 in 50, or 1 in 500 chose to take up this tremendous opportunity. Percentage-wise, it means that only between 0.2% to 20% chose to leave Egypt. These percentages repeat themselves throughout the history of mankind, and especially during current times. Everyone can feel the looming trouble and impending doom that led to a growing distress. Many understand that they are slaves to the system, but few dare to go against the systems of the matrix, and even fewer are able to present an alternative. It seems that despite what many think, it is not an easy feat to be free. Because freedom is not synonymous with being carefree. That is, freedom does not mean doing whatever I want, whenever I want. Freedom is linked with taking responsibility because freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. Only human beings were granted freedom of choice. And that is why the more freedom a person has, the greater the responsibility he must assume. Therefore, it is far easier to be a slave, to complain but continue to comply, to reduce human existence to a space of mere survival, and to nourish the continual state of fear. You can find many self-help books and seminars that market themselves by promising the oh-so-coveted freedom, but you will hardly find anyone that calls for assuming responsibility. The word responsibility is not widely popular, nor does it roll off the tongue easily, and as such is not even a part of our vocabulary. However, without responsibility, there can be no real freedom. That is what already happened in Egypt. The suffering was great, the help was sent through a messenger bearing a masterful salvation plan, but only a few chose to pack lightly and leave everything behind. Pack lightly is also a code for the correct manner in which a parting should take place, without attachment and with minimal baggage from the past. Most people live their lives attached to worthless things in comparison to their freedom. Therefore, only a small few were willing and able to leave their own evil, yet familiar Egypt, for the unknown of the Promised Land. However, it is impossible to help he who does not want to help himself. It is impossible to reason with anyone who chooses to block his ears. It is impossible to offer a helping hand to anyone who chooses to withdraw his. This is so, since the laws of creation will always allow each person freedom of choice. The darkness was never the problem of mankind. Rather, it is humanity itself that refuses to align with the laws of creation in order to receive all the help and blessings that the light intended for it. The undisputed proof of this human nature is what the Bible tells us happened after Pharaoh and his army drowned in the Red Sea. Seemingly, after the darkness was finally and utterly defeated, all of the problems should have disappeared. In reality, all of the real problems only then began to unfold.
And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. Exodus 14:11-12. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness, to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Exodus 16:3.
What became of it? Non-stop complaints despite all the miracles and wonders. Horrific ungratefulness toward Moses, who sacrificed his entire life to fulfill the high mission of leading the Israelites from slavery to freedom. And worst of all, the continual doubt and distrust in the Creator. A prime example was the golden calf. Supposedly, the Israelites could have gotten to the Promised Land quickly and easily. In reality, it took 40 years of wandering in the desert because the light understood that until the consciousness level of the slaves changes, there is no point of discussing becoming free people in the Promised Land. The first plan of the light was to reach the Promised Land straight away. The second plan stretched across 40 years. The desert is the place where the Israelites were mentored to inwardly transform themselves from a state of slavery to a state of freedom, since only free people can pass through the gates of the Promised Land and build it. The journey through a desert is also a code for a place where transformation takes place. Moreover, not all the Israelites were able to survive and cross the desert. The Bible tells us that some of the people who walked through the desert died because they were unwilling to change themselves from within. Also in our present time, not everyone who was able to recognize the lies and deception of the Matrix will be able to stand among those who will build the new world, because the new world will be built only by those human beings who completed the process of inner purification and aligned themselves with the laws of creation. Only a new human being could build the new world. Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments. The greatest treasure and the source of continued spiritual development for the Israelites was given to them as laws in the form of the Ten Commandments. We will expand on the universal eternal significance of these laws in future lectures. The happening on Mount Sinai was not only a historical account, but also a code for the way the light sends us messages. Only Moses could ascend to the top of the mountain. The spiritual meaning behind it was that only he possessed a high enough vibrational frequency to be able to receive the messages from the light. Only he possessed the suitable vessel to be able to receive from the light. The rest of the people were ordered to stay at the bottom of the mountain and strictly warned to keep away and off the mountain. The spiritual meaning behind this order was that attempts to receive higher frequency vibrations by those not suited to receive them could only cause them confusion, dissension, heresy, madness, and in extreme cases, also death. Moses, like all spiritual leaders, needed the seclusion at the top of the mountain in order to absorb the high light radiations, which he would then have to transmit, using words matching the consciousness level and vessels of his audience so that they could grasp it.
When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. He was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near him, and he gave them all the commands the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, he removed the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what he had been commanded, they saw that his face was radiant. Then Moses would put the veil back over his face until he went in to speak with the Lord. Exodus 24, 29 to 35.
In Hebrew, the word for radiation and the word for horn stem from the same root. That is the reason why Moses was depicted in European art as having horns, whereas in fact the Bible described the aura that radiated from his face and testified to the unique closeness to God with which he was blessed. Most people are not privileged to experience such closeness, and therefore intuitively they are in awe of a person with such an aura. They would also not be able to understand his messages unless he veils his face. The veil is the code name for the ability to bridge the instructions from the light so that people could understand them. Every spiritual leader needs this ability in order to convey the messages from the light in accordance with the different consciousness levels of the people in the earthly material world. Though, when Moses ascended back to the top of the mountain, to the domain of the light, where eternal joy exists, he could remove the veil and receive from the plentiful of the light. The Alma School for Humanities curriculum is based on the model set in Mount Sinai. It bridges to every person, wherever he or she may be, the ultimate high knowledge that was given to humanity at the time of the days of the final judgment, the time during which we are all meant to reach the peak of our development as human spirits. You are invited to ascend to the top of the mountain with us.